There's kind of two ways to, in some sense, structure your vision or structure your perfectionism. One with being concerned about what's happening today, possibly the other being more concerned about what's going on with the large vision. And certain people can do better in various moments or environments with attacking the today versus attacking a long-term vision.
Right.
I think it's a little bit of both, but at the same time, I think it's helpful to sit down with yourself and really, like you were saying, have that vision in mind and just be willing to take random, also calculated steps towards it, because we
Right.
really don't know what tomorrow brings. And I think that's part of accepting this desire to be perfect, but also welcoming the imperfections.
Yeah.
All right, Aftergrads, welcome back to another episode of the Aftergrad Podcast. I'm Robert Kane.
And I'm Victoria Gilbert.
And today we're just going to have a light conversation about perfectionism, how it has risen up in our lives, what that looks like, some of the challenges of navigating being a perfectionist, and different milestones that we've had to overcome in regards to trying not to be a perfectionist.
Yeah, I mean, I think now perfectionism has a bad rap. I think it's changed. Before, like, people would be like, oh, I'm a perfectionist. And the connotation with that would typically be, oh, I'm organized, or I'm really attentive to detail, and I see things that most don't see. But now it's coming into like a detriment to a lot of people, including myself.
Yeah. Oh, and likewise over here. No, I definitely feel the burn. I mean, historically, but then also presently. And I think today we also wanted to bring around this perfectionism moment in regards to our show, the journey that we've taken when we started back in November all the way up until now, but also talking about how being a perfectionist, I guess in some senses has helped us, but also hampered us in various moments when
Yeah.
we're trying to execute things in both our personal careers, but also creating a vision for the Aftergrad podcast and what that has looked like thus far.
In interviews, that was my go-to. You know, that question that they all ask is like, what is your weakness?
We always get it. What are your strengths?
And you,
what are your
and it's a
weaknesses?
trick question because you always have to say your weakness, but then you have to come full circle
Yeah.
and, you know, make it seem
Frame
like
it.
it's
Yeah,
not
you
that
gotta
bad.
bubble it up and wrap it
Right.
up. Yeah.
Well, mine was always, oh, well, I'm a perfectionist, and at times, you know, I get really, really intense
Yeah.
with getting things right, and so much so that it ends up being a detriment sometimes in time or sometimes in execution.
Yeah.
For like a whole team or whatever. See how bad I'm making it sound right now. But then
No, not
I
at
would
all.
eventually bring it full circle and express how it has helped me in so many things as well, especially in like the creative realm and I don't know, catching faults and things.
Yeah, no, that's part of what, I mean, being a perfectionist or loving the idea of perfectionism, I guess. I mean, it has its ups and downs. And I mean, it's funny that you were mentioning like the weakness question, because I was thinking of a moment that would be what I would say in interviews up to a certain point. But I feel like there's a better way to frame it. And I think you were getting
Yeah.
around to that better way. Like maybe you're extremely detail oriented,
That one.
or you have high degree of senses where you can kind of adhere, or you see things coming before others do, right? Those are ways that I guess being a perfectionist isn't a bad thing, although it can over time like have a bad rap, or it can be in a situation where we're feeling overwhelmed or we're experiencing pressure to perform in a particular way that maybe society or our bosses, for instance, expect us to be. And so it's
Yeah.
kind of like finding a middle ground of accepting the fact that, I mean, being a perfectionist in a lot of instances is arguably a good trait to have, especially when you're creating things on your own and you're trying to be your own boss, or even when you might be in a corporate environment, or regardless, you might be in university. It doesn't matter. Like having that desire to quote unquote be perfect, or I think a lot of it also comes down to just caring about the work that you're doing and the output that you're executing.
Yeah,
a lot
and
of times.
that was like a lot of the things that were leading up to this conversation today is like, as we were preparing for season 2, our perfectionist tendencies were starting to catch up to us, specifically with like delivering on a certain date, delivering on a certain vision, and getting together everything right so that we can finally see what we have seen within.
Yeah.
And so that's why we were like, oh no, we got to start with this, because it was the
Yeah.
very thing that was kind of getting in our way with restarting the show.
Yeah, 100%. And I
Yeah.
mean, that actually brings me to a comment that was actually shared. I mean, definitely in season 1 when we were putting out the episodes, I think the big thing for me, I was talking about consistency in a particular sense last episode, but for us, we felt like it was just about starting, right? And creating foundation. We always say that it's better to at least have some sort of progress in the vision that you're trying to execute rather than trying to be perfect. And I literally majored in media studies, right? So for me, when it comes to visuals and things of that nature, I care deeply about the final product. But at the same time, what we were doing with the Aftergrad podcast, there was the Great Resignation. People were quietly quitting. All of these different things were happening so quickly and abruptly. It felt like we had no other choice but to talk about it so immediately. And we were in an environment, and I was making this comment at the end of episode 1, where we felt like the time was now.
Right.
It had to be done then.
Right.
And we were in an environment, it was a very small
Regardless
apartment.
of what we had, regardless of what we were doing
using
at
the
the same
resources
time.
that were at our disposal.
Yeah, yeah. And when I think back to our first episode, it's like, ooh, mighty cringe.
Oh my gosh.
Mighty
the audio wasn't even
cringe.
on. I literally double checked later on the media playback, and I was like, Victoria, our mics weren't even on.
But it's
That's
the
insane.
fact that we started.
Right,
it's
we got
like,
it out.
and that is what we got to talk about today, is getting over that perfectionism and like realizing that just simply starting is it.
That's it.
That's the perfect part.
Yeah.
Because we were trying to hit a timing. There was so much happening that we were experiencing, and for us to have waited and waited and waited for it to be right, to purchase the right camera or the right microphone, we would have lost the moment, lost the beauty in like what we're sharing and what we're discovering, you know? So yeah, I'm very proud of us in that regards. But at the same time, in the work world as well, like we have to keep reminding ourselves of this lesson, because it never stops.
Right.
Like the minute, even though we started getting the episodes out and so forth, by the time we came back around, it's like, okay, we had a vision, but it still wasn't there.
It wasn't what we wanted
yet.
entirely.
Right. And we had to be okay with that.
Yeah.
Excuse me. We had to be okay with that. And we had to also be okay with others seeing the unperfect
Get on that. Get in
part.
the imperfect
And
vision that
listen,
that's tough.
that's
It's so
tough,
difficult.
because you know people are looking at it like, oh, these are babies.
Yeah, right. Like they still got to grow into themselves.
They don't know what they're doing.
They don't know what they're doing, right? And those were thoughts that were swirling around, I know, in my mind, your mind, and obviously also I was talking about like a comment that was shared with us, or with me personally, because thank you, we love feedback. And there was an aftergrad who reached out to me, an older aftergrad. We love feedback. And there was an aftergrad who reached out to me, an older aftergrad, who basically shared feedback on our visual and said, I love what y'all are talking about, but if I could just offer my 2 cents. And thank you for those 2 cents, because we appreciate it. We really do.
Because I'm a person, on top of being a perfectionist, I love constructive criticism. And it might be because I come from a sports background, so you constantly have to have an open ear to coaches and so forth. So I'm all about it. But geez Louise, when I do get it, I'm like, if only you knew. Like,
regardless, if only you knew, I know. But I think that was the beauty in what we were able to do. We were able to swallow that mindset and shift it and push it to the side and say, you know what, in this moment right here, we know what vision we're working towards, but we just have to work with what we have, work within the environment, the small apartment that we were in. The lights weren't giving what we wanted. We were using 1 camera. Now we're using 3 cameras for our multicam setup, but we're using our iPhones. We haven't upgraded to a full camera moment yet. And I think my perfectionist says, oh, I hate that. But then I look at the work that we're doing, and I'm so proud of it, how we were able to create the studio, continuing to post and elevate the vision. I feel like you have to, as a creative, but then also just in general, with whatever work that you do, you have to give yourself room to grow. And I think what we did, we intentionally planned milestones that we wanted to work towards while putting out something that we knew wasn't perfect or close to the vision that we wanted. And I'm okay with that, because now we're here and we've seen the progression, and that's a beautiful thing, and it keeps building upon itself.
Yeah. I have a question. Do you feel like the trait of being a perfectionist is like a born thing or a learned habit that grows over time? And like for you personally, where do you feel like your perfectionist started or began?
Oh, like I love that question. I think it depends on the person. If you're a Virgo, hi. I think that for you, it might be intrinsic. It might be something that's built in. I love my Virgos. I'm Virgo moon.
Yeah.
But I think it can be both learned, but I think it can also be something that you're naturally born with. In terms of like learned behavior, I'm thinking about literally our education system as a whole. We're constantly being forced to maintain metrics. If you didn't get an A+, you're not perfect. And you're forced to compete and compare yourself to other people, and you're not even focused on what I've always viewed as the ultimate goal of education, which is to learn and internalize, not to recite information and to pass a test. And I feel like that's something that the girls nowadays, especially when I was in university, it was always about plug and chug. You know, I'm thinking about my mathematics degree and how it was always about, okay, just tell me the information that I need for the test. I never internalized that mentality because I just love to learn and I'm so curious. And I feel like there's a decline in intellectual curiosity right now, which is majorly unfortunate because we have to, as you said in the last episode, and as we just published on our IG as well, this need to continuously learn. So I definitely think that it can be both learned, but then it can also just be born. Specifically, like with me, I think it's a combination of both. I think my background coming from like a low income background, being raised by a single mother, hard work was always around me. And I knew that even to this day, if I want to adjust my tax bracket, I have to work hard. I have to be intense and quote unquote perfect, at least in my eyes, so it can be somewhat of a detriment. But I just know and remember growing up in my world, the only thing that I could genuinely control was academics in my life. And I internalized that. And I have no problem saying that publicly. That was the one thing in my realm that I could control and have total influence. And I had unhealthy practices that allowed me to get to that point where I was achieving this perfect academic vision for myself. For example, I mean, I literally wouldn't eat sometimes in order to achieve a certain grade on a test. I just wouldn't. And I would force myself, I would kind of structure it as almost a reward. Like, I can't eat until I feel confident that I'm going to go and ace this test. And it was interesting because I was going at it from a perspective like these grades, me being perfect in the classroom is going to help me shift beyond everything emotionally that I'm experiencing currently. But I still always, like I said earlier, had that urge and desire to learn. I cared, even when I was in math class, I didn't care just about the formula. I wanted to know who created the formula. Where's that person from? Where did they hail from? What was their thought process? Why did they create this formula? So that's always how my mind works. And so I think, it can definitely be learned based on your upbringing. But I think certain people have that tendency outright when they're born. What about you, friend?
I think it's something learned. I think it comes over time through like not necessarily traumatic events, but just through events. And then personally for me, I know it blossomed in sports for me because like you're watching tapes, you're training like hours and hours a day, and you have these coaches who are saying everything you do, every time you train, that all matters and that all will like lead up to your result. The coming of the day of like a competition, you have to perform.
Right.
And you have people who are in the stands who are looking at you, including like recruiters and so forth. And so there was automatically a huge pressure. And maybe this is why, I no longer play the sport because it wasn't necessarily for me, but I know it's for other people. But it was all about making sure that I pleased my coaches or that I pleased the recruiter or that I pleased my dad. And so that mentality was always questioning what other people are thinking. And you can't control what other people are thinking.
Never.
And it's taken me so many years to understand and truly grasp that and to release my pressure that I would feel. And, I'm probably describing anxiety right now. So like people who are listening in are like, girl, sis, I don't think, So, but it made me really attentive to detail. And then also like I was really into the arts and so forth. So the creative space, like with colors and stuff, I wanted everything to be right. And I wanted everything to look a certain way. So I think I want to say it was learned. I want to say it was learned, and then a little mixture of anxiety and being an introvert by nature as well. But I've come full circle, and I'm kind of, hey, like you could say you've come full circle. I'm very tentative.
We're still working on it to
exactly.
This day. Like
there's
goes
a new
away. You're always going back and forth.
Right. It's like when you climb one mountain. What do they say? Like you have
There's
new
mountain.
Right.
You couldn't see the horizon.
There's
so
a better
you didn't
way
know
of
how many
saying
more
it, but
mountains would be up there. Yeah.
Right. I don't know the exact way of that phrase, but for you guys who know, y'all know. I feel like for me personally, time exacerbated my perfectionism as well, because I felt like outside of like sports now, and I'm back into like reality, everyday living, lifestyle, career, and so forth. There was with a pressure of time on your back, and that could be for so many things like bills or like getting into the school you want or being recruited at the right time, you feel like that in order to get to the right location, you have to make every step perfect to get the timing right. And I had to unlearn that and realize that it's in the imperfection that you actually end up where you need to be. I felt like coming out of college, I was supposed to be in a corporate position to get to the end goal. And that's something I'm very blessed to have a vision of what I want to be in the future and so forth, because I know some people are still trying to figure that out for themselves. But sometimes I remember someone saying like, you're either like you can visualize where you're going to be, but you don't have an idea of like where you're going like today. Or you're very good at like knowing what's happening today, but you don't really have a good projection of what is to come. And so I'm definitely the other person where like I have this vision or have this vision board that's like future, right? But I don't necessarily know what it looks like today. So I just always spent so much time trying to figure out what was supposed to be today, what's supposed to be tomorrow, what's supposed to be next year, so that I can reach that vision.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was kind of transpiring with time. And there was like, I felt like if I made every step right now in my time, then I can get to the vision faster.
And you've changed your mindset on that.
Yeah, I realized I have to be imperfect. I have to like have the mistakes. I have to get through all of that, and I have to take time in it, and I have to like ruminate with it. And that's something I always say is like really find comfort in the uncomfort zone. And then also like now that I've lost track of time, I've also lost track of being so perfect. And I realized that that is part of the growth process. And I know we preach this a lot on the show, but it's one thing to say it, but of course it's another thing to do it, and to constantly be where I'm at right now, not necessarily in corporate, but also not necessarily a freelancer. It's very
awkward.
Very, very flipping awkward, because I'm like, okay, well, I know I'm exactly where I want to eventually end up, but I can't be perfect about today.
Never.
I can't think about the bad decisions that I've made and think that it's a detriment to my result. And realize that that actually is part of getting to the result. And I have to learn those things in order to get to that vision or that place that I so see for myself.
And that's like the full circle moment, I think, at the end of the day, because kind of in our newsletter too for Unlearn, we mentioned certain learnings and certain quotes from people that kind of formulate that thought around, like, for example, what it's like to be in your 20s. We graduate and then we make the transition. And then, you, like you were saying, there's kind of two ways to, in some sense, structure your vision or structure your perfectionism. One with being concerned about what's happening today, possibly the other being more concerned about what's going on with the large vision. And certain people can do better in various moments or environments with attacking the today versus attacking a long-term vision.
Right.
I think it's a little bit of both, but at the same time, I think it's helpful to sit down with yourself and really, like you were saying, have that vision in mind and just be willing to take random, also calculated steps towards it, because we really don't know what tomorrow brings. And I think that's part of accepting this desire to be perfect, but also welcoming the imperfections as well. Like,
and that's what happened when we started the show. Like 100%. We had a vision, but we didn't have the right tools to create that vision. So we had to just like move slow, and it felt so slow, just moving and continuing to show up despite like the quality that we were putting out, and knowing that we could.
Demoralizing certain days. Like there were certain days we didn't even want to record. I mean, I feel comfortable saying that.
Right.
We pulled up, but kind of even towards in episode 15, I think I remember us talking about just the consistency and what it takes to execute anything. I mean, obviously we're participating in the creator economy, but of course, even if you're in a corporate space or whatever type of side hustle or work that you're doing, I think everyone faces these moments where they're going to feel the pressure of being imperfect. And a lot of times it's not even internal, or if it is internal, it's from you internalizing the societal, as we always say, expectations around what being perfect looks like and the definitions surrounding that. Like you have to get straight A's, or you have to get a certain score on an SAT, ACT test in order to excel. You need to play D1 tennis or else you're not a real athlete. Like all of these things we've projected onto ourselves because this is kind of what society has promoted over time. And we have to do work to unlearn that, to feel comfortable interacting with ourselves, but also as we move and take those unclear steps towards the vision. But I think having clarity on the vision, I know it's so weird to talk about. I still to this day, like, I know what I want my life to feel like, but if someone were to have me explain like all of those steps that lead up to it, I really couldn't. And I think that's okay. I've definitely gained acceptance over that for myself. I think that's one way that I'm allowing myself to try not to be perfect 24/7. Like, I know what I want it to look like. I know what I want it to feel like in terms of a lifestyle, but the steps I'm still kind of unclear on. I can
Yeah.
tell you vaguely, where I would like to be when I'm 25. I mean, and why I'm so unclear about it, it's not necessarily self-doubt, but I'm thinking about where I was when I was graduating from Claremont McKenna, how I thought that my life would project after those 2, 4, 6 years. I literally have in my Google Docs a 5-year plan that talks about what I want to be doing within those 5 years.
Yeah.
A lot of that stuff has not happened.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that because
Yeah.
I've seen a shift and I'm welcoming it.
Right.
But at the same time, I don't think that that means I'm imperfect. I think that that's just the process as us as aftergrads have to adjust to.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm sorry. I just
Yeah,
agreed with everything you're saying.
everything.
You have to submit to being ignorant of not knowing. You have to submit to, of course, like we just said, being imperfect. And you have to submit yourself to making mistakes in order to let the current really take you to where you need to go. So yeah, everything you were saying like hits those points, like coming out of school and like not knowing, but then also having all this information that you want to know and continue learning, but then also like just letting loose of time and what money brings and
Right.
what money can provide and just working with what you have. That's the beauty. And that's what, and I forgot what actor said this, but he said the fastest way to get to where you want to go is by going slowly. And so we are moving.
Hello. And I don't think our
slow.
current generation, especially
that.
Gen Z, I don't think they have that internalization just yet, but I definitely understand that now.
Yeah.
Because I just think about, like I said, the previous 2 years, about how I wanted to get these things done quickly because I
Yeah.
felt like that was going to create the lifestyle that I wanted. But again, you talking about being ignorant of those next steps, I think you have to be comfortable with it taking a long time,
Yeah.
especially if you're starting with a deficit, as
Right.
a lot of our aftergrads are, as we are, and deficits can come in many different shapes and sizes. It
Yeah.
can be economic, it can be in various levels of privilege and things like that. But yeah, I think
yeah.
the long term, you
It's
have
the
to be
attention
comfortable.
span for me. And that was so
too.
hard. Being part of Gen Z, like everything is so much faster to us. We
Immediate.
even consume content way quicker. We just think everything needs to move faster because it also, they were saying as well that like Gen Zs were seeing, we grew up hearing how the world is going to end and so forth.
Yeah.
So a lot of us have this kind of YOLO mentality or like move really quickly mentality to like live as much of life as possible before,
Yeah.
everything explodes.
Right before it all ends,
Right,
and we're trying to
exactly.
figure out what's
yeah.
next.
And they were trying to see how it correlates to, maybe some children growing up too quickly and so forth. But I won't continue on that tangent because I feel like that is a kind of hard argument to come full circle by. But what I will stand for that was spoken was that like our attention span is very low. And so therefore we don't also stay committed to things as well if it doesn't show for itself within that slow process of time, which is not it, because if we would have quit a long time ago
know.
if that was the case, like if
Right.
we decided that, listen, this is not moving fast enough for us, boom, pow. But then that's how we lose a lot of great ideas. That's how we
Right.
lose a lot of great inventions. And so again, I said this before, Invention Lab at Google, like the reason why they had so much success over the past years was not because they had geniuses in the room who knew what to make off rip and were just perfect off rip. No, they knew how to make a lot of mistakes really, really quickly over a period of time so that they could make the great invention. And no matter how long it took to get through that bad, they knew that eventually it would hit a good. And so they
Right.
just sped that process up. And over time, that trend just made a positive trend.
Right.
So I stand beside that. Like you have to go through that cycle and you have to stay committed
Right.
to that cycle, or else you're not, of course, you're not going to see any results. But
Right.
y'all are so quick, not y'all, me included.
Us, everybody
we
in this
are
moment that we're
so
living in.
quick, right? We're so quick to just be like, next.
Yeah.
But I mean, hey, who can like?
I think it's a
we
balancing
can't-
act.
Yeah,
Right, 'cause
because
there are
we
certain
have
moments.
bills coming in every
Yeah,
week.
of course.
Of
Right.
course, we want to move fast.
Yeah, we
because the
wanna move
world's
fast.
moving fast on us, and it's just
ooh,
like,
yeah, it
what do
is.
you expect?
Yeah.
So at the same time, sis, sir, I'm on your side too.
Yeah.
If you're listening and you're like, well, shoot, I don't have time. I
Yeah.
don't have time to make mistakes because
Right.
my lifestyle is not just dependent on me, it's dependent on family. Like
Right.
what I provide today affects my tomorrow.
It does.
And so when I reach that dead end of thought, I'm like,
But the solution,
we're
I
not
think,
given the time.
Of course, we know that because of social media and because of the technological innovations, that Gen Z and young folks currently have very short attention spans. And that then trickles over into our presence when we might be in jobs. We might be leaving within 6 months, or we don't have the desire to stay committed to things that we're learning or to particular careers that we might be pursuing. But I feel like you have to locate that balance and you have to be able to say to yourself, and if I'm going to see real tangible results, I do have to be committed and I have to accept that this is going to take a long period of time. And while that does imply a certain degree of pressure, because again, we were talking about how we just don't know if there's going to be that particular payoff that we want to see. I think you have to constantly go back and forth with checking in with yourself to see, okay, am I actively giving enough energy for me to even see the type of payoff that I want from this thing to begin with?
Being real with yourself in the mirror.
Being real with yourself in the mirror, like a whole Issa Rae moment on Insecure. Like you really need to talk to yourself. Like, am I doing everything? Am I going as hard as I possibly can?
Right.
And I think that we might be struggling with being able to have some type of perspective, trying to step outside of our own reality and understand that the answer to whether or not you might be going or being as committed as you possibly can, the actual answer might be no, but we aren't able to be real with ourselves, which then leads us to say, I'm done, I'm quitting, like I'm not going to pursue this, when it's so unfortunate because you could be so talented and you could be offering something so valuable to yourself, to communities, to a corporation, like you were talking about inventions. There might be this idea that, I don't know, you might be in a phase where you're trying to seek investments and you're getting constant no's from people in terms of these investments that you might be trying to gain for yourself. But if you let those no's slow you down and shift your intensity as you go after what you're trying to create, it's unfortunate because you weren't able to stick through for the long-term payoff. And all of this creates pressure. And I kind of want to go back to a point you were making earlier about using this analogy of tennis or any type of high-level athletics. Billie Jean King, we both play tennis. We're familiar with her work, her history. She has a phrase, which is pressure is a privilege. And I really, for tennis, for sports, for being in corporate environments, for being in the creator economy, anything, I live by those words because I think it's so important. When you feel that pressure, the pressure to be perfect, the pressure to perform in sports and academics, it truly is an honor, because if not, there's nothing to live up to. There's nothing to be done to push new boundaries, to expand and to create something beautiful. So while you might be fearful of the unknown, while you might be struggling to transition into a new position, a new job or something like this, internalize that pressure to be perfect. Of course, honor your mental health, but at the same time, recognize that you have a job and it's a privilege to be in a position of whatever you are doing. And you have an opportunity to create immense value, not only for yourself, but for other people. So again, I'm just always about finding the nuances to the situation. And I just love those words by Billie Jean because I think it translates to so many things, especially the journey that we're walking on right now.
And again, I really we said it lightly before, but I want to bring it back, is like, we're trying to figure out like where you channel your perfectionism, because like, regardless, I've realized as well, is like a lot of like quote unquote issues or things that constantly get in the way of like career, lifestyle, and so forth, they don't necessarily go away. Like anxiety doesn't really go away.
Never.
Perfectionism for me doesn't never really go away. But what I've realized is ways I can channel it for good, and being really aware when I'm channeling it for bad. And sometimes, the majority of the time, the perfectionism is projected onto yourself rather than put onto like a project. Exactly. And so it turns into negative talk. So it turns into like a psycho-cybernetic cycle within yourself of you constantly telling yourself you're not good, you're not this, you're not that, and then we all know how that turns out. You become it. Then it becomes seemingly inherent and not something that's learned. And so I realize now that my perfectionism was more on the learned side, and it came from certain traumas or certain instances, and I have to evaluate those instances so I can then unfold and unravel those things for my present. So when those new realities arise that are similar to what I experienced when I was younger, I know and I'm prepared and understand that I should not be, channeling the perfectionism onto me. And that
Right.
instead I'd be like, oh, whoa, hold up.
Yeah.
What we're not going to do is that what I'm not going to feel pressure is in time. And I'm not going to let it allow me to feel like I'm not getting to where I need to go for the future vision.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we did, like coming into the season is also, we wanted to come back a lot sooner.
Yeah.
We wanted
for
to come
sure.
back in like,
September-ish, right? Like even October,
like saying
August.
it out loud, I'm like, oh my God. What
right. And we're in November right now. It's literally
thinking?
November 1st.
Yeah. So I kind of changed my perspective on like the time factor. It's a trade-off, right?
is.
So like in order to get closer to our vision, we traded off time,
Right.
In order to get to what this is looking like now. But
Yeah.
if we were to,
rush
put
the
that
process.
right.
Yeah.
So certain instances you have to kind of negotiate with yourself as well. Is like, do you want to give yourself more time in order to get that perfectionism that
Right.
you want?
Yeah.
Or do you want to get it done right now and leave behind the perfectionism tendencies? And so
Yeah.
I think we did that at the beginning, and
Right.
then for
We
the second
shifted.
season we were like, no, we're gonna trade out
we
that
gonna pull up,
time.
right, how we want
we're
to
gonna
pull
trade
up.
out that time.
Period.
Yeah.
And I feel like a perfect way to wrap up what you're saying on this topic of perfectionism in terms of, is it a good factor or is it a negative factor? Kind of thinking about, like what you said, is it being projected from an external factor or is it the desire to be perfect coming from within? And I think checking and determining, okay, if it's coming from within, which is what this second phase for us in terms of how we wanted to pull up for season 2 was, it was definitely coming from an internal desire to make sure that the vision was visioning and it was being created in the way that we had always imagined for it.
Yeah.
We weren't being beholden to the pressure of time, to the pressure of other individuals saying like, where y'all at, etc., things like that. We wanted to come back the way that we wanted to come back because we care about the message for Aftergrads, for us, the work that we're putting out into the universe. We want it to be high quality so that it just continues to grow. And I mean, I'm so proud of everything that we've been able to achieve.
And in the midst of our like career lives as well, like outside of like the podcasting, I'm taking this lesson for sure because again, I want to be somewhere certain, but uncertainty is here.
Yeah.
It's really here. And so in it, I'm just really just chilling.
Yeah.
Chilling. You find so much peace too. Now I feel like people probably think I'm I'm saying hippie, but I don't mean hippie. We all know like that connotation that comes with hippie. I have to explain this because the cancel culture is real.
Yes, it is.
But like when I say hippie, I mean like back in the 80s when like they were known for being is it 80s or 70s?
I don't feel comfortable commenting.
Yeah, you're right.
I'll have to do my homework. But I want to say like 80s.
I want to
70s.
say 80s. I want to say 80s or
Yeah.
70s, 60s.
It could actually be 60s. I mean, I know
it's the
we'll cut it, but I
60s.
do think it might be the 60s and 70s.
But yeah, when we draw back in history, like the hippies, air quotes for those who are listening in, I definitely mean like that chill and more like live day by day, life by life mentality actually starts to settle
Live
in.
and
I'm like,
let live.
oh, this is a thing. I guess people really do you can live in this state.
There's so many ways that we can talk about perfectionism. I mean, I think even in our current life right now, like aside from the podcast, like everything hasn't been going perfect for us as we both navigate our different ventures and our personal career and things like that. As I work with clients, as you work with clients, etc. Like things on that end hasn't been perfect either. And I mean, I will say this too. I'm just grateful that I have you. And I think you just have to have a teammate, or I just can't imagine doing this by myself.
Same.
I really, really can't. And it would make sense either. Like there's so many aftergrads, there's so many people. Like eventually we're going to have a whole moment where we bring multiple aftergrads on the show and we just talk about how we're feeling and the ways in which we're leveling up together. But I can't imagine going through these tough moments where I'm beating myself up because I am a perfectionist alone and being lonely in those moments. But I always have you, especially because we're living together as well, to talk through these things and to just have a sounding board, because that for me is one way. Once I can afford therapy, I'm definitely going to be going there and talking about my issues with being a perfectionist. But for now, I have you, my best friend, to talk through like, okay, am I being too perfect in this moment? Like, should I just let this thing go? Yes, no, maybe so. Let's talk it out. And I have that privilege because we're working in such close relations right now, and it's such a privilege, and I'm grateful.
Yeah, for sure. That's a point. There's definitely the word community within that formula. We just made a whole formula. Yeah, there's time that depends on that like affects perfectionism, and then also community that aids the perfectionism. Right. For sure. And a lot of other like mental things that we go through as we go through this journey. And so that's why it's like so important for this moment right here. And why I believe in it so much that needed.
Definitely. And I mean, on that note, we have a post thought that we wanted to talk about.
Yeah, post thought.
I mean, it connects to the idea of being a perfectionist. It's this concept of quietly quitting, being a quiet quitter.
Where did you find this post thought?
Where did I find this post thoughts?
Yeah, because you found it.
I did find it. You're totally right. I'm like, huh? Where did I find it? I think I really didn't find a particular post for this one, but
It was an article?
Yeah, that's just been talk of the town right now because the girls are in corporate and kind of in conjunction with the Great Resignation and people still being in the corporate environments, being in any type of position really, but specifically in the corporate environment, you're having a lot of people who are quietly quitting. And I think today for our post thoughts, we wanted to just talk through this. How is it related to being a perfectionist? What that looks like. Is it okay? Is it a bad thing? I know different perspectives exist on the matter. So, and I'm sure fellow aftergrads are experiencing this too. Actually, I have to confirm. I mean, different people in my life have expressed to me that they are quietly quitting currently. So it's just so interesting to me because I know
like
work
the job
ethic.
at hand. So like they're in a position or they're dedicated to a certain project,
Yeah.
but internally they're like not present.
Yeah, it's kind of like you're doing the bare minimum. Yeah, that's really helpful. We should define like what quiet quitting is so
Yeah.
that everyone is on the same page. Quiet quitting is essentially doing exactly nothing more, sometimes maybe less, of what the job description details for you. So obviously when you have this overachiever mindset or you have this like perfectionist mindset, I know for me, I'm always going to go above and beyond. I'm going to make sure that in my eyes the work is perfect. But people that are quietly quitting are suffering from overwhelmia. They're exhausted. They might be having issues with their coworkers and their managers and their bosses. And so they're just like, you know what?
But I actually feel like
I'm
there's a
over it.
difference between like your effort and your perfection.
Okay.
I feel like there's a difference.
I think
Because you can still
Yes.
put in that effort, because you were saying like you show up and you put in 100, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like I'm the same way. I feel like I have to be perfect. It's a part of it,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe there is a way you could separate it so that you're not like going tenfold and over and again, like going on that negative cycle that we were talking about earlier, and just getting the work done and putting
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
the effort in right, but not
Yeah.
necessarily like, how do you draw aside the perfectionist out of that?
Yeah, I
You know?
think, yeah, no, that's a great question. I honestly feel like the solution partially is separating your identity from your profession, almost. Ain't that a word? I know it is. I know y'all felt that because that's what we're trying to work towards. Like, we love what we do for a living. I mean, that's the goal. That's the purpose. That's the
Say it
point. We're trying to separate, I forgot what I said. We're trying to separate our identity from our profession. That's the goal. Ain't that the goal? That's where it's rooted in.
That's where the health is at.
That's where the mental
That's
health
how you
is.
put yourself, yeah.
Because you don't want to say trick yourself. Well, society and corporate environments, in some sense, trick us because you go in wide-eyed and bushy-tailed, excited to assume this new responsibility and everything that's on the job description. But then you get into it, people want to try you. The
Right.
corporate environment wants to try you. Your manager wants to message you at 9 p.m. Child, business hours is over. Okay? This is well documented. Why are you all up in my Microsoft Teams? Why are you all up in my mentions? On my IG DMs, why are you messaging me? Why do I have an email from you, deck due tomorrow? Child, I'm trying to take care of my children. So this is where it's coming from. People are quietly quitting. They're over it. They're tired. And so when you have these environments and you're in this moment, you decide like, I have to continue to pay my bills, but I'm not ready to shift because I thought I liked this job. So why am I not enjoying myself? That's kind of where this notion of quietly quitting is coming from. And you have a lot of people who are experiencing that right now. I'm not sure. Maybe Gen Z is experiencing it more than older folks, but even still,
No,
I know
I feel like
exactly.
this, especially, it's just now finally being written
It's
about because
that part.
it's on the low. As you said,
Yeah.
it's literally in the title, like quiet quitting.
Yeah.
But yeah,
No one
there's
knows.
a point
No
where
one needs
you're
to
just
know.
like, I'm over it.
Yeah, I'm done. I've
I'm
had
done.
it.
But I
I've
think
had it.
I think
But I got bills to pay.
Again, yeah, there's contingencies
Yes.
that you have to abide
Account
by.
for. Yeah, every time. And that's where it's coming from. So I, for one, I support it.
I listen, I try to, I go through, I feel the quiet, when I feel the quiet quitting hitting me and spiritually, I take note
Yeah.
I write it down. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm feeling this way today. Like, I don't feel like going into work. I'm gonna
Right.
be there, but I'm
Yeah.
not there. I let that only stay for 2 months. But
Yeah.
again, like I say this and I understand that that might be a privilege, but not really. Sometimes for me, it's a decision.
Yeah.
And I do have other things
Yeah.
depending on that paycheck.
Yeah.
But despite that, I know it comes into reputation for me, and I always want to leave on a good note.
Always,
and
yeah.
I'd rather leave now before
gets out of hand.
the quiet quitting becomes very prevalent in my work.
It's becoming present, and then people know
And then-
you're loudly quitting.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, but that's just me. I know everyone moves differently, and I know everyone's case is different. But for me, when I start feeling that, specifically since we're talking about like the aftergrad moment, so maybe a majority of us have that luxury of being able to move and shift into another job before we really get like contracted in.
Yeah.
I move. I listen to it the first time.
Yeah.
And
You have to acknowledge it.
Yeah. And if you have the privilege to listen to it the first time, then listen to it the first time because boo, once you hit the second and third, it's sometimes it's too late. And again, it's like I say this all the time, but like time is our asset in this moment. And so if you can figure that out now, then pivot
right now. And I should also give a more nuanced response because I was like, I support it. So I don't necessarily support it, but I just acknowledge why it's happening.
Right.
I wanted to share that. So I think, again, when you're operating from an individualistic standpoint and you're the person that's in these environments, always I'm going to say you got to prioritize your mental every single time. But at the same time, I'm really big on getting a job done. It's never worth sacrificing your physical and mental and spiritual well-being. So that's why I then lean into what you're saying. When you recognize that, okay, this is becoming toxic, then I need to do my best to try to figure out where to go. But then there's that other point. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But yeah, sometimes you need to really understand why you're quitting because I'm seeing some people and they're quitting just because they don't like the word.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but then you have to sit down with yourself. It's again that mirror sit down or that friend or that mentor who tells you, boo, you want to be here, but you have to be here first. You have to be present in this moment in order to really get to where you want to go. So now you just have a stank attitude and you just want to be at the happy, glamorous part when, again, we just talked about it. You have to get through the ugly, the imperfect, and the unknown first. So, yeah, quiet quitting, but why? Are you quiet quitting?
Yeah, exactly. Everything is so nuanced. So, yeah, exactly. I like that question. Why are you quietly quitting? And then understanding why.
Right.
And the reasons as to why you went there in the first place. But then it's also like, I'm placing most blame on the corporations a lot of time and the society that capitalism is existing within, because you have these job descriptions too. Again, like no one asked to be messaged at 9 p.m. in the off hours after business hours. And so like, I want to offer that support. Like, okay, I definitely understand why people are literally over it right now. But again,
it could be corporations like
not being clear and transparent. Tell me that you're about to
stepping over their boundaries.
Yes, you're stepping over their boundaries. And I mean, again, sometimes obviously we say like, yeah, you have to set those boundaries when you're going into the position, ask what you want up front. But sometimes you have people that don't have the confidence, which is then rooted in particular community members being told that they're already unworthy for that position to begin with. So they don't even feel comfortable advocating for themselves off rip. So then you get into the position, you're being overworked, you're then being capitalized and exploited. They want to be perfect. And it goes into this cycle, which then leads to people quietly quitting and being stressed and feeling imperfect. So it's just multiple people, I think, coming to the forefront. You have these corporations, you have society at large, you have various laws that make corporations a more enjoyable place to feel and be in this period where, like we're saying earlier and a little bit in episode 1, so much innovation and technological change is happening so rapidly. And so everyone is experiencing growing pains right now. But at the end of the day, it's the people, we've said this earlier, that make the corporation, that make any business run. It's your human capital. And if you're not listening to them and cherishing them and showcasing the ways in which you care about them, you're not going to have a sustainable business.
Right. But then it draws the line with like what you were saying, when corporations start to pass their boundaries, it does come to a level of knowing your confidence in yourself and what is meant for you will come. And if it does mean stepping away from this environment, and that's what your soul is telling you, then simply step. And it won't hurt you, especially if you have confidence that they are. And then sometimes before the step, of course, because, we shouldn't just hop to that.
Right, we always
but
make
I
the
mean, there's
caveat.
also the part of, communicating that as well, but then having confidence to communicate that clearly, that listen, like this is that time frame I have for myself. And by you intruding that time, I'm having less time to get myself together to then come up full-heartedly to the work that needs to be done. And it can avoid the situation of quiet quitting. But it all circles back always to that why factor, and which why is okay to step, right? So like one question I would ask myself before, because I always, when it starts to seep, I'm like, hold on, but is it because you don't want to do the work? And we just said that. But then I ask myself, have you learned everything from this opportunity? Have you learned everything you felt like you needed to learn from this opportunity? And I do a reflection. I really think about it. Like, what have I learned? How has it changed me as a person? Because everything, even if it was like the bad situation, it's supposed to be instrumental, or it has meaning to your story. And so I go through that. I go through, how has it added to my story, and why do I feel like it's now a chapter that needs to be closed? And so when I can confidently say, I learned this and I learned this and I learned this, but it's really time for me to go and my spirit is not here to show up 100 anymore. I leave.
You have to.
I do. And then it finds the right next thing, finds me right in the nick of time before the bank is
depleted.
right. And like it's literally, again, following the wave. When one wave lets you down, you get that next current, babes. And so it happens, but it's trust. It's trust in that. And that trust is, it's very, it has an equilibrium with like faith and then confidence. And it's like all those three, if you can have that, that is a huge center compass for yourself in moving when you need to move and so forth. So this quiet quitting is a thing. But again, I feel like our solution would be ask yourself the why and figure out if that why is fixable or not. And if it's not,
begin to shift. All right, Aftergrads, that's it for this episode. If you enjoyed and want to keep up with us, definitely give us a follow on Instagram at the Aftergrad Podcast.
If you enjoyed our visual version, make sure to subscribe on our YouTube channel. There you can be notified of our latest releases. And we would also appreciate a 5-star review. Not only are we appreciative of it, but it helps us grow this growing Aftergrad family.
And we still want to hear from you. So if you have any questions, comments, life situations that pertain to being an Aftergrad, definitely share those with us via our form so that we can feature them on an upcoming episode.
For now, we are still just navigating the pandemic, careers, our goals.
And who knows what else.
Ciao.
See you soon.